Welcome everyone to my web series. I'm interviewing today Dr. Chelsea Jackson. Chelsea and I did an interview, if you can believe it, 2 years ago, and your light is so amazing and so illuminating. I was saying earlier, I actually have butterflies talking to you because I enjoy speaking with you so much, and I think you're doing amazing things in the community, and you've really been on the forefront of talking about yoga and diversity. And your PhD, when we were speaking, I believe you were just getting started with it, and
I
you're
was, I was
yeah.
like right in the middle, but yeah, getting started with the dissertation. So yeah.
Yeah, and that just seems like, to me, it seems it's gone by very quickly. To you, I'm sure it's been a long process, but I love that your primary research methods talk to Black teenage yoga practitioners and their experience
Yes.
of their yoga
Right.
in a way to create literacy, in a way to create inclusion. I actually
Absolutely.
read an article where you were quoted about bringing yoga into the schools, and I'm interested in looking at your last piece that you wrote, Toward a Performance of Possibilities, Resisting Cultural Injustice. It was a piece that you co-authored with your mentor, Dr. Wynn. So I think that's all this literature is amazing. Plus, you're in the upcoming book in the next couple of weeks, Yoga and Body Image, a new
Yeah.
anthology. So you're out there putting it out there, living it, doing it, breathing it, and I'm excited to talk to you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to speak with you again. It's always a pleasure and I want to just, kind of return that love to you and just let you know that your light is very inspiring as well. And I'm inspired every time I see your image, and it just lets me know that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Aww.
And to have comrades like you doing this work, it's really it's supportive, it's encouraging, and it just really uplifts a lot of people. So thank you for
Thank
your
you.
service.
Thank you so much. I feel like we're sisters, really, in this cause. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate that so, so much. Tell me, for those of you who haven't met you before, or maybe haven't had an opportunity to look deeply at your work, how did you get involved with this? How did you determine this was going to be your PhD topic? What inspired you to take up this work?
Right. Okay. So before I started the program, I was actually an elementary school teacher. I taught the majority of my time at the third grade level. I also taught first and second grade, but it was during my experience with third graders. I don't know if it was their developmental stage that they were really thirsty for more than just the work that we were doing in the classroom. So at the time, I was practicing yoga, and there were things that I started to learn from my own practice that I learned how to integrate into the classroom. And that goes beyond the asana, just taking a moment to breathe, just taking a moment to reflect, all of these things that we learn through yoga, through our bodies and through our postures. But this was able to be applied to the classroom. So because of this experience, it led me to a lot more line of questioning in terms of how can we use yoga not just in the way to calm children, to get them to pay attention and to learn and to behave in class, but how can we use yoga as a tool for critical literacy development so
Nice.
that students can then begin to apply their lived experiences and have a method or a framework to use, which in my opinion is yoga, as a way to think critically about the world around them and how they engage the world. So I kind of came to this work through my lived experiences and also kind of pulling from different fields. So the field of education, the field of practicing yoga in general. And I really saw yoga as a type of literacy, as a way of knowing, as a way of understanding. So my concentration is actually language literacy and culture
Nice.
within the Division of Educational Studies. And so my dissertation focused on really how can yoga be used as a tool for critical literacy development.
That's
That's a mouthful,
amazing.
but that's
Wow.
pretty much how I came to it.
That's amazing. And in the course of your research, what did you learn about that? Like, what was your big takeaway, your big aha, your big inspiration?
I think more than anything, my approach really influenced the way or the information that I pulled from the research. So my approach is, we talked briefly before we began the interview, was narrative inquiry. I am a trained ethnographer. Both of my mentors and committee members, Dr. Maisha Wynn and Dr. Aiden Downey, are both very skilled ethnographers, and Dr. Downey is very skilled in narrative inquiry. And so it was during this course of narrative inquiry that I really began to see the connections between yoga and this way of asking questions. So narrative inquiry is really just a way to get a fuller picture and a fuller understanding, and to really put all of the focus and concentration on your participants. And my participants in my research were teenage girls who all self-identified as Black or African American. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to use a framework or a line of inquiry that really focused on them telling their stories, mm-hmm, was a way that I really got a fuller picture, instead of going into spaces and relying on teachers to tell me about their students or administrators to tell me about their students. Instead, I wanted to go straight to the source and ask students what their experiences were, not just in this space where we were practicing yoga, but in the outside world, and the ways in which they applied their yoga practice to the world and how they interpreted information. So my biggest takeaway was really having an opportunity to talk and really listen, and not feel like I had to have all the answers. Yeah. I think a lot of times as researchers, because we have done these extensive literature reviews and all of this background research before we actually approach the field, I think a lot of times we come with, of course, assumptions, but in narrative inquiry, it is encouraged that we just leave all of that and just be really an open slate, so that we can really be informed through our participants. And those were the girls with whom I worked.
That sounds like an amazing experience. Now, I've noticed as of late, especially with a lot of the conversations that we've been having online and in the web community, there has been a shift away from maybe, or not so much a shift, but the conversation has started around yoga and body image, yoga and diversity. You know what, mm-hmm, broadening what the mainstream image is, and allowing others to put forth what they feel yoga is. How do you feel that's affected yoga and diversity? How do you feel that's affected maybe some of the girls perhaps seeing themselves in publications now?
Sure, and that was one of the major issues. I just came back from Estes Park, Colorado, and I was on the Practice of Leadership panel, carrying that torch that my comrades from the Yoga and Body Image Coalition really contributed to in San Diego. So in Colorado, I had an opportunity to share the story of how I even approached the camp that we did, and that we wanted to do a vision board prior to this. And I brought in a bunch of yoga journal magazines, old ones that I collected over the years, and the consensus was from the girls, and this wasn't without me saying anything, the consensus was, Miss Chelsea, there are no images that look like us in here, or there just wasn't a plethora of images that they could choose from to place on their vision board that reflected either the fullness of their bodies, or their skin tone, or whatever the case may be. They just didn't see themselves reflected. So although I was aware of this, just because I have been a long time observer and subscriber to Yoga Journal, the fact that I can count how many and name the exact women of color or Black women who have been on the cover should say something, and it sends a message. And I think that, you know, with the girls, it made that even more explicit to me. It made it more pronounced that there needs to be a shift in terms of the images that we see. And it was just so, I mean, it just does something to you to see your image, Diane. When I open up the Yoga Journal, this current subscription, to see your image there, it just says something. It's just like, yoga is for all bodies, all body types, all people, all colors, all races, all ethnicities. And I think that there has to be a shift when we talk about the images that we see, because when we don't see those images,
Yeah,
that sends even a larger message, in that people that we don't see here present are not understanding methods of self-care, or are not worthy of self-care, or
absolutely.
which that's what yoga does, right? It teaches us
Absolutely.
compassion with ourselves as well as others, but also it gives us, again, a framework to use to learn how to use self-care as a way of empowerment, and to increase our longevity. So when you don't see women who look like you and me on here, it's to ask the question, well, do we not care about our health, or
Right.
are we just being ignored?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. When we were on the panel in San Diego, and I got to speak with Carol Gorin, who's the editor in chief, I had mentioned to her, why isn't it more
mm-hmm,
prevalent? And I was surprised at her reaction. I said, I feel excluded. Like, I most definitely do. I haven't had a yoga journal subscription in at least 6 years. I bought it once when I owned a yoga studio because I felt compelled to have it. And I flipped through it and I said,
uh-huh,
there is nothing in here for me. And the clothes they even represent in those magazines don't fit bodies that have larger thighs and bigger bottoms, which
right,
we know in other ethnicities this is common. This is a common body shape that's not represented. And she seemed
right,
surprised, and she apologized to the panel for making us feel excluded. It had never occurred to her. So I sometimes think when you're in the dominant culture, or perhaps when you fit the yoga stereotype, you don't see beyond that. And I think it's important
right,
with work that you're doing and actually putting it out there, because you have been very open online, and I see you on Twitter and I see you on Instagram putting up those pictures, and we have to. It's hard to encourage people with big bodies to do it, and different
right,
color skin to do it. They feel like they're almost maybe showing off, or maybe they don't feel comfortable because a certain aesthetic has been created. But it's up to us to be out there putting that aesthetic out there, because the silence is what creates the opposite aesthetic, right?
absolutely. And then going back to what you said, Diane, in terms of not knowing, like when you have an editor in chief or an entire staff that is just like, wow, I didn't even know that these were concerns. That's what happens when you have a space that's homogenous. That's what
Yeah.
happens when everyone in that space that are making decisions are either the same race or the same gender or the same, whatever the case may be. It's going to be harder for us to develop awareness if we don't even have people sitting at the table. And I think that that would be the number one way for us to begin to see a shift, is that it has to start higher up, and we
I
have to
agree.
start being more inclusive when it comes to creating the stories that are contributing to certain magazines, or the images, and even the network of people that we have, within our reach to reach out to. So I think that that is important as well.
I think you raise an excellent point there. Tell me about your experience on the leadership panel. Tell me how that conversation unfolded. What was your takeaway from that conversation? And moving forward, has anybody offered any concrete resolutions to changing this whole concept?
Right. Well, I think because my life's work is really definitely influenced by my lived experiences as a Black woman in the United States, and not just in the United States, but in the South
Yeah.
of the United States, the southern region of the United States. It's funny, on my way here today, I just had a really like eye-opening experience with racism, with a man who I don't even know if he realized what he said to me was very offensive. And he was just talking about, it was just really off color. And it just, all of that to say, without even having to get into the details, is that racism in this country, the fact that it is so pervasive because it's embedded in the fabric of this nation, not in just the country of the United States, but North America
No.
and abroad throughout,
Yes.
right? So when you have that, you have to, no matter what community you're in, we have to realize that this community is still within this culture, within this soil, this North American soil. So regardless if it's going to be a yoga community or whatever type of community, because racism is so pervasive throughout the world, that doesn't make us immune to it. So I think when I came to the Yoga Journal conference, it was a lot of the same. I again could count how many women of color or people of color in general were around, but that's something that I'm used to in yoga communities. Not that I don't engage in yoga communities that are full of people of color or different body types, especially where I teach at Kashi, Atlanta, urban ashram, very diverse. But I'm very used to, especially on a broader scale, being maybe one of few in a yoga community.
Yep.
So it was very, I think what made me feel the most comfortable was the panel. The panel who consisted of people who were advocates for gender equality, for who represented the trans and queer communities, who represented people with disabilities. I think that because we were all coming from spaces through our own lived experiences, that it allowed us to be open and sensitive and aware to other people who have been marginalized. So even if I'm talking predominantly about having more Black people or people of color being represented throughout advertisements and yoga studio advertisements and marketing and all of this, I was able to understand and kind of consume it even more, to be at this place where we decided and made a deliberate attempt to heighten our awareness around these issues of marginalization. So it was a very supportive community in terms of the panel. And then the room was filled. It was, good. I think at one point, standing room only. I think that they estimated about 100 people were there. And we were in a small lodge because we were on the grounds of Estes Park. So it was very intimate. It was very in your face. I know that a man who was a volunteer from Kansas City came up to me, and he was a white man, and he said that he was not expecting this panel to go the way that it did. He thought that it was going to be just a panel on leadership, how to be a leader in the yoga community. And he said initially he was very uncomfortable when we started talking about race and all of these gender equalities and inequalities. But he said by the end of it, he said he realized that this was the highlight of his weekend or of his week, the Yoga Journal conference. Ooh, so it's just comments, right? It's just comments like this. I'm going to tell you, Diane, I was very nervous when I started the panel. I was very nervous to speak my truth. I can write about my truth. I can comfortably talk about my truth on a Skype interview because it's just me in the room and I don't have to worry about anybody else and interpreting their body language and all of that. So it was a very sobering experience to finally be able to voice how I feel as a Black woman with curves, as a, in these spaces. So the experience overall was amazing. I think that we had an opportunity to really voice and express our truths. And I appreciate, although I still will always have a critique for any space and any publication that is imbalanced, and especially that silences and ignores certain people. But I do want to commend Yoga Journal for even having us there to begin this conversation. So
and that I don't know if on the hot seat, right? Like Yoga Journal was initially on the hot seat for that because we are speaking about their publication.
Right. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. I still think about it. What was the craziest part was that I was walking out after feeling so great about this experience. I was walking out with Dr. Carrie Cower, who was actually the moderator on the panel. We became very great friends during that time period. But I saw someone who triggered a lot of emotion for me with regard to the yoga community and issues concerning race and marginalization. I don't know if you remember about 3 years ago with the very large online yoga publication where I made a comment about a video, Yoga for Black People. And the editor at the time, I think that he is still there, made a comment about I was accusing him of being racist, and really I wasn't. I was speaking my truth, and that the video could be interpreted as very offensive because it was just a stereotype about Black people. And because yoga is such a sacred space for me, I guess I can be a little uptight and be very serious about it because it is a sacred space for me, where I go to retreat sometimes from the racism that I encounter on a daily basis, that I encountered right before I started this interview this morning. So to see that person, I didn't say anything to him, but just to experience the panel, and he was not in there for the panel, which I think would have been very powerful for us to have dialogue in this space that is saying that we are deliberate about trying to work this out. It triggered a lot of emotion inside of me. So I felt great though. It felt really good to know that I was in a community that was ready to talk about these issues. But then again, it was like it came full circle for me to see the person that triggered me to continue this path in the first place. So that was wild.
It's like a mixed blessing almost, right? Like who knew? Like his impact would set you on a course that would end up being so powerful. So it's interesting how blessings appear to us, but I can't imagine being on this high and then being pulled back into reality just like that, right?
Right. Just like that.
So it's an ongoing concern, it's an ongoing struggle, and I really love that you've taken on this challenge. So what's in the future for you? What are you working on right now?
Sure. So I'm continuing to write, not just for like within the realm of social media and blogs, but also continuing this work in the field of education. Nice. I think because yoga is becoming such a growing market, let's just go ahead and call it what it is. We know that it is a very sacred practice, but once capitalism gets their hands on it, it goes wild. So because of that, education is going to start to catch on as well. And I'm starting to see so many advocates for yoga in schools. But although I was a practitioner of that, of integrating yoga into my classroom, I think it's a very slippery slope that we need to continue awareness with in terms of not thinking that everything is yoga and it's just this kind of like neutral thing that everybody can do. True. It absolutely is. Yoga is for everyone, but I don't want us to go into it also with a very dangerous colorblind mentality that can be very damaging, especially for our youth. And from my experience with my research, one conversation with a young lady stands out in mind that at her school, there were flyers being passed out from yoga. I don't know what the yoga program was, but there were yoga teachers who were saying that they were going to come into this school and teach the students yoga. However, they kept labeling the students at risk, yoga for at-risk students, at-risk students. And so these labels, which can be, I think that people get confused on the language to use and how to describe what it is and who this is for. But it was very damaging for this young woman. She did not like to be called at risk. She did not consider herself at risk, whatever we define that term to be. And so my work is going to continue to work with teachers who want to integrate yoga into the classroom, and also for yoga teachers who want to work with youth. Although we may be great yoga teachers, that does not mean that we're coming in without our own influence from this world. And so I think it's important for teachers to remember that even yoga has to be culturally responsive. Even yoga has to consider the individual that's coming in front of them to practice, and to just have an awareness around that. So all of that to say, I have decided to be a lot more independent. I am not going the route that most people do after a PhD program, especially in education, and that is to go the tenure track professor route. I'm not counting that out completely, but right now my work is to continue to practice yoga, to continue to train teachers who are interested in working with youth, especially youth who come from marginalized communities, so
Absolutely.
or underserved communities,
I like
right?
the term
So,
underserved or underrepresented communities because we're
right,
out there,
right.
we're just not being served.
Absolutely, absolutely. So continuing to do that work, continuing to write, working on a nonprofit right now, exactly for that purpose,
Nice.
to be able to be accessible to people who really want to do this work.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. And that's your gift for the world. So you have found your dharma and you're right on point with that because if anybody can do this, this is you and you should absolutely be leading the charge on this. Last time we spoke, your favorite quote was drink as you pour. And I love that so much that I have sequenced classes around that. I have taught
Oh my
parts of my
goodness.
teacher training around that because it really speaks to self awareness and self care. Coming out of your PhD studies, coming out of this experience at the the practice of leadership panel, do you have any new quotes or new inspirations that are leading you into your future, or do you still reside in that drink as you pour? I mean, it's always going to
I
be there, but is there something else that inspires you or
right, and
motivates?
that frame of mind or thinking or being in the world came from my teacher, Jaya. And I actually said that again on the panel. And again, minds were blown. You could just see it over the across the room when I said the drink as you pour thing and really explained more about what that meant. And it's something that can resonate with us all because how many of us pour out constantly into this world and we're completely drained or burnt out. As a
Mm,
teacher, I know what burnout feels like. As a yoga teacher, because we're serving, we know what that feels like or how that feels. So I am still there to remind myself with that drinking as I pour because this has been quite this dissertation has been quite the experience to get through. But through it all, I always mentioned that the girls with whom I worked were my drinking in, right? So
uh,
they were the ones who were feeding me through this process. And then I was able to produce and articulate what it was that we experienced and then pour it out again. So it's just this constant dance. And then my teacher, Jaya Devi, always says this dance between effort and ease, right? So
yeah.
making sure that we find that balance, right? So it's going to take a lot of effort, but at the same time, I don't know if we want to participate in those things that are just so like that we're just feeling like we're fighting and hitting a dead wall.
Hmm.
Just find the surrender in it as well. And then we may begin to see things shift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Beautiful. As always, it is an absolute treat and an honor to speak with you. And your light is so illuminating and so bright. And we're blessed as a community and as a world to have you here doing this important work. I want to thank you for taking this time with me today. As always, Dr. Jackson, it's been my pleasure and honor.
Diane, thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.